Welcome to part 4 of the Organics tutorial series. In the previous videos we have done all of the modeling for our organic so far, and in this video we're focusing on coloring and texturing it. So the plan is to texture the entire organic in this video, and I'm going to give you some basic tips for texturing and some basic tools that you can use. We are not going to complete the organic, however, in this video. We will do most of the texturing, yes, but I still plan on doing one more video after this one where we finalize it and add some things to the surroundings. As always, I will be building everything in 1.16.5, and I'll be using various mods and plugins such as Worldedit, Fast Async Worldedit, Arceon, and Worldedit CUI. That's the visualizer I use. But enough of that, let's go ahead and start with some basics on texturing and how to do it. Just a couple of quick tips about texturing before we move on. Mainly, I want to point out to anyone who is a beginner what to avoid when texturing, and this is something that I feel like every builder has gone through a phase where they've done this, myself included. I have way too many builds that involve this technique, and that is noisy texturing. First, let me explain why this looks bad. I remember when I was a beginner builder, and the reason I did the noisy texturing was because I thought, oh, I'm blending all of my colors together to get, more interesting color. All I was thinking about was mixing colors together. I wasn't thinking about the actual form of the model and how those colors were basically not affecting it whatsoever. It still looked just as flat with this noisy texturing as it did before it. Instead of mixing all of the colors together in this noisy way, we need to separate them into distinct layers so we can get a clear separation of the darks and lights. This example is showing the exact same color palettes, just distributed in different ways. And you can clearly see when you distribute them from dark to light in a gradient fashion, you're emphasizing the forms and the shapes in whatever it is that you're coloring. And that is what texturing is supposed to do. You're essentially painting and creating this illusion of depth using gradients. That's not to say you can't use noisy texturing at all. Just know the reasoning behind why you're using it and understand it's not really going to enhance the overall look of the forms. Those are the biggest tips when it comes to texturing. I will be talking about it more once I actually paint on my organic, but that is my very quick explanation of basic texturing. Before we apply any of the texturing, I just want to show you how to apply it first and just run over some basic tools that you can use. The number one most obvious way to color your organic is to simply use a paintbrush. And I've talked about how to do this with Worldedit brushes in my Worldedit video, and I'm assuming if you've made it this far into this video, you should know how to make a simple Worldedit brush and how to paint on a surface. And as you have seen me doing in all the previous videos, I have been using Go Paint that does the exact same thing. You just get a handy dandy menu to do it with. And then you also get different types of modes and patterns that you can paint with. But that is the number one thing I would say you do is just paint the larger sections first, and then you're going to gradually work your way down to finer details, blending and texturing and all of that. This is good for getting colors down really quickly. You can also just select around the entire thing and replace it. That's also fast to do. But if you wanted to be a little more precise, then painting would be a good way to go. Now, I'm going to show you a couple other ways, in addition to just painting, where you can also add texture to the organic as you paint or with just simple commands. So let's go to this first sword, and I am going to turn this into a brush that will lighten any surface it touches. So that's all it's going to do. It's going to be an ordinary sphere brush. We're going to start it like an ordinary sphere brush. Then I'm just going to add lighten on the end and then the brush size. So we're not doing any paint. Instead of adding like our paint or our block that we want as a paint, we're doing the lighten instead. And now I should be able to paint this on any surface, and it's automatically going to take those blocks and try to lighten them up. So you can see I can just keep clicking and it's just going to keep lightening it up until it gets lighter and lighter and lighter. You do have to be careful though that, it can get out of control pretty quickly. It almost looks like we're burning a hole in her dress. So that is a lighten brush, and the opposite of that would be the darken brush. So it's the same thing, except instead of lighten, we're doing darken. And that does exactly the opposite. It will darken everything that you are painting on. And once again, be careful not to go too dark, and it can get extreme really quickly, so you do have to be very careful with either of these. If you go in close, you can also see it's going to put the most unusual blocks into the pattern. And usually when I do use these brushes, I like to go in there and manually clean them up and remove certain blocks that I think just look weird in the gradient. It's always going to make the cleanest gradients, but it's just using some very strange blocks. Like, why is it using this block? I don't know. I don't even know what this block is. A structure block. Why, Minecraft? We do not want this in our organic. So both of those, lighten and darken, come from fast async Worldedit. If I mentioned that before, I don't remember, but that's where those come from. This next command comes from Arceon. It's one of my personal favorites. It's going to be the same thing. We're going to start with an ordinary sphere brush, but this time we're going to do blend and then once again do your brush size. And so instead of lightening or darkening the section, this is going to look at two adjacent colors and just do its best to blend those two together. I can just go along this edge here and we can see it's trying to blend those as best as it can. Now, depending on how close the colors are to each other, it's going to have a harder time. I find it always works best with whites and grays and blacks. It doesn't do as well with things like blue because there's just not as many blue blocks to deal with. So it's kind of filling it in with whatever blocks there are available that kind of go with it. All of those brushes I just showed you added quite a bit of texture to organic, but they weren't really any particular pattern. So I'm going to show you some additional commands in case you did want to add some kind of pattern into your build. The first one I wanted to show you is the image brush, and this also comes from fast async Worldedit. And this is going to start just like all of those other brushes, but instead of doing a sphere brush, we're just going to do brush image. And then after that, we're going to paste in a URL of our image. Now the URL has to be an imgur link, so it has to look something like this. If it's not from this website, it's not going to work. So you're going to have to have an account on there or find an image on there and paste it in. And this image that I have is just a basic denim-like pattern. It's not really anything. It's kind of flat, but I'll just use this as an example. And then after that, you can enter the size of your brush, and you want it to be pretty big because if it isn't, the image is going to get really squished down and it's not going to look like anything. It's not going to have any of that texture there. So I'm going to make it rather large. I'm going to make it 100. Go ahead and enter that. I'm just going to paint it on the floor over here just so you can see what it looks like. So that's what the image is, although when I look at the image for real, it just looks like solid blue with very light textures, but because this is trying to translate into Minecraft, this is how it's represented that. But it still does have some interesting textures. It's got the darker corner up there and the lighter corner up there, and it's doing its best to fill in those colors. You could have images that have way more detail and texture. This one just happens to not have that much. So if I wanted to take that image and actually apply it onto my organic, I could just tell it to mask a certain block if I wanted to quickly lay down some texture. So I'm just going to mask 22, and then I can just paint directly on top of the dress and all of that, and it's automatically going to lay down that texture from that image onto our organic. Now, I would never keep this texturing. I do not like it, but I just wanted to show you this option if you ever wanted to use it. I did want to tell you, though, to be careful about using image brush and to use it sparingly. I think it's really a matter of personal preference how much you use the image brush. I personally try to avoid it as much as I can because I don't find it as clean looking as just texturing things myself. I have used it on a couple rare occasions for large areas that needed a quick texture that would have been way too difficult otherwise, but aside from that, I typically don't use it. But I still wanted to show it to you as an option in case you didn't know it existed. Now I'm going to show you some additional patterns that you can apply. You can apply these to brushes as well, but I'm going to just show them to you on the ground here just so you can see a little bit better what they're doing. And these are just different patterns you can do from various plugins. The first one is simply a simplex pattern, and I think it's from Async Worldedit. But anyway, we're going to replace our selection with simplex, and then in brackets, we're going to set the scale for the simplex. So I'm going to set now in a second pair of brackets 2 different blocks to use, and let's just do light blue terracotta, and we'll also do blue terracotta, just to see the difference here. So we've got our replace simplex, just making sure I have everything. I think that's it, so then I can just do that, and it's going to create that kind of pattern for us. Now if I change this first number in the brackets to something smaller, it's going to make a much tighter pattern. So that higher number, you really could see the overall pattern much better. So that's what a simplex pattern looks like. And if you want to apply this to a brush, you simply add that same thing, that simplex 8, all of that, you'll just put it on the end of our brush command. So if I wanted to apply this to a brush, it would just be BR, sphere, simplex, and then you'd add your brush size on the end, and that's how you will apply any of these patterns to a brush. They all do pretty much the same thing. All right, so that's a simplex pattern. Let's go over here and look at a cell pattern. This one is from Arceon, and I have yet to use it, but I thought I could show it to you because it looks kind of cool. So we're going to just change the simplex in this command to cell, and everything else should be exactly the same. The only thing I might change is this number. I might make it a little lower because I forget how this command works exactly. So let's try replace cell. Okay, so that's what that did with that size. I'm going to try changing it again. We'll try going up, this time to 7. Okay, so you can see how the cell pattern looks a lot different from the simplex. This was a size 8 for the simplex. This is a size 7 for the cell. And you can also add a third block in there. You can add as many blocks as you want, I believe. But if I wanted to add some white wool in there, then it might look something like this. So that is the second pattern for you. The last one I'm going to show you is one I use all the time for everything. Now, this doesn't have anything to do with painting the organic at this point. I mean, you can use this on your organic. I probably wouldn't apply it directly on the human organic, but it is a useful command and we might use it later. We just might, so I think I'll show it now. So I'm going to take this command and we're just going to replace cell with the VOR, short for Voronoi, however you say that. For some reason, the full word doesn't seem to work right correctly, so I have to always do the VOR abbreviated version because the other one doesn't seem to work as well. So let me do this, and then I have my size set to 7, and that is what we get. And that's how it looks when you have 3 blocks in the pattern. That's cool. I've actually never tried that before. Let me take out the 35-0. That's how it normally looks. So here you've got the simplex, which is from Async Worldedit, the cell and Voronoi from Arceon. Arceon does have additional patterns, but I won't show them all here. I can link to those if you're interested in seeing what all is available. So you can take any of these, apply it to a brush, and then apply it directly onto your organic. I could turn this into a cell brush if I wanted to. I could say cell, and then say size of 5, and then give it the blocks that I want to use. 1593, which I think is light blue, but I could be mistaken. And then 11 is dark blue. And I forgot to set the size of my brush, so I'll set that to 7. And I can also tell it to mask my lapis. And now I can paint directly on my organic that pattern. And now she looks like she's wearing a cow pattern. That's exactly what we wanted. The last texture tool I wanted to show you was the same one I showed you last time. It's just the replace tool, which you just type REPL1, and then you can just left click a block to be your paint and right click on a block to paint over it. And this is super handy for switching back and forth between blocks. So that covers all of the basics of all of the tools I wanted to cover. I may not use all of these tools in this organic. I was just showing a lot of options for you. Like all things, I usually use the tools to get just the basics down, but then I always go back and refine things by hand because brushes can only do so much. That's not to say the tools and commands aren't useful, they really are, but I don't wholly rely on them for texturing. Now that you have some basic tools in mind, let's talk about color palettes and how to pick those. I see this question get asked a lot. How to choose color palettes? Well, to me it's really obvious because I just look at a range of colors in the range I want and just go with it. It doesn't take any additional thought. The hardest part with color palettes is trying to find blocks that match, because some colors like this lapis doesn't have very many blues that match it. So in cases like this, it's going to be a bit challenging. But first, let me start off by creating a color palette for my skin. And what I usually like to do is just kind of build it in the air somewhere so I can see what I'm doing. But what I'm looking for really is I'm looking for a block to be a highlight and a shadow block, because I already have my midtone. This sandstone block is kind of like my midtone. So I really just need to find a darker block that's also a similar color, and then a lighter block to be a highlight. So looking through my creative inventory, I can see all of the wood types are valid options for skin tones. Those have some really nice colors in there. Oak might be an option for doing it with sandstone, or even birch. Actually, birch would probably be better because it's just slightly darker than the smooth sandstone. I could even have oak as an one step darker option, so let's just build this out. I'm just going to kind of build out my own little gradient. There's not too many other colors that go with sandstone. Endstone doesn't quite work. I can just show you. If I put it out here, it looks a bit yellow. I have used it before for some organics whenever I do want that yellowish tint. It really depends on what you're going for, but just know that every block does have a slightly different tint to it. So that is an option, but I don't think I'm going to use it on this one. The only other block I can think of that would really go with this is bone block as a possible highlight, because it does have a yellowish tint to it, so it can kind of go with the sandstone. So basically you're just trying to build out a gradient. The best gradient that you can possibly come up with, something like this. I don't know if I like those planks there. I just can't put them there as an example. But there's a very basic gradient. I've got my midtone, I've got a shadowy block, and then an even darker shadow, and then a highlight. And I might mess with it later, but the nice thing about doing this one little section at a time is I can easily just replace a block if I find I want to use a different one later. That's perfectly fine, but that's my basic color palette that we're going to use for the skin. What I usually like to do first is figure out all of the shadowy parts. So I'm going to start by using the stripped birchwood, and I'm just going to make a Go Paint brush for this. I'm just going to put that on top of that just to get myself started, but I am going to be using a replace brush. I'm going to get rid of all of these extra tools just so they're not cluttering my hotbar. This is my replace brush, so I'm primarily going to be using Go Paint and then my replace brush. And most of the time, that's all I need. Most of the time, that's all I need to be happy. Right now, I'm just trying to add some shadows, and you might be wondering, how do I know where the shadows are going to go? Because you know how in Minecraft, the light is kind of always the same. Well, you need an imaginary light source that's hitting your organic from a certain angle, and then make the shadows match wherever that light would be coming from. So basically, you're making it up. If you really don't know what to do, I usually just think of anything that's lower is a shadowy part, anything that's higher is a highlight. Basic things like that. So this arm over here, I'll probably put a little shadow underneath of it like this, but then on top I might add a little bit of a highlight. Also look for any crevices, like right in there, I want that to be darker, so I'm just going to do this by hand so I don't accidentally paint too far. I'm just going to paint this tiny little section as darker because I know she's bending her arm there and it's going to be a bit darker because of the crease in her arm. Some smaller things like hands really show a lot more detail once you start adding in shadows. However, with little things like this, I might go back to this and add in some slabs and stairs. I think that will help refine these shapes a little more just because it is so tiny. I only use slabs and stairs for really tiny details like the hands, the feet, and the face. Another little thing about texturing is, this is getting very detailed now. This is me getting very, very picky. If I have a section, if I look at this in the layer that it was built. If I had it like this, sometimes this bothers me where I've got two different color blocks on the same layer. I don't know why, but sometimes I'm so picky that I just have to color this entire row of blocks to be the same color. I'm not saying you can't do that because I don't always do that, but it's just one of those things that stands out to me and I always seem to want to fix. If it helps, I thought I'd point it out. So what I'm doing here with the shadows and highlights can be applied to every single section of the organic. Once you figure out your color palette, you just go through and start adding shadows. Now, I'm doing the face a bit prematurely because it's not actually detailed yet. Usually, I'd probably wait to actually put the detail in the face before texturing it, so I might just go ahead and hold off on this part, but I'm going to get everything else done as best as I can. Now, I'm trying to add some highlights, but I think I need to switch out the bone block for something else because I just realized her hair is going to be that color. So I'm going to have to find a different color to be the highlight, or just not do a highlight at all. Or, as another option, I could make her skin slightly darker, but I don't think I want to do that. I might just go without the bone block, and maybe what I'll do instead of adding a highlight to this, I can just add an extra shadow with the oak. Sometimes I just have to compromise depending on what I know the rest of the organic is going to involve, so I think that I can just insert some oak down here and this should be enough. As long as I have enough contrast throughout the texturing, that's all that I really care about. It has nothing to do with whether a highlight is there or not. I've got all of the skin textured except for the face, so I don't think I want to put off the face any longer because honestly, once you get the face put together, the organic just starts to look so much better. So we're going to stop the texturing stuff for now. I'm going to get rid of all of these things and let's focus on the face. I always start with the eyes, so I'm just going to look through my inventory for some good blocks to use for eyes. I always like to find a nice white block. Actually, a good block to use is white concrete because it is a little grayer, or even bone block would be good. But I know I'm going to use bone block for the hair, so I might not use it here, although it does make a very good white of eyes. White terracotta also works well if you're working with larger organics and you need that little pink in the eyes, then I would use that for that. But as far as knowing what blocks to pick, I just kind of randomly select it. I have no idea what color her eyes are. I can make them any color I want really. I might make them green just because. But I also need something black, so usually I'm going to go with a black concrete or black wool, one of the two. And then I also like to get black glass. I always like to mix glassing with my eyes because it just looks nicer. Oh, something else I also try to make sure I get is a white stained glass pane. And I use this for like a highlight in the eye. But anyway, you don't really need to have all of these ready before you start building. You can kind of see what I'm doing as I go. But I usually start by collecting a whole bunch of blocks. Now we start to mutilate the face. That is what we're going to do. So I know that I already kind of punched out a hole there, but I'm going to make it even bigger. And I am just going to punch it as big as I can. Well, not as big as I can, but just enough to where I can start to fill it in with some white. So I'm just replacing a lot of these inside edges with white. And maybe I'll put that pink one there if we wanted that extra bit of detail. I don't know if that block is going to stay there or not. Probably not. We might end up losing a bit of space in between the eyes, but that's okay. And let me see, now I have to think about the iris, which is going to be the colored blocks. I don't like how there's those shadows already in there, so this is the part where you're just going to have to play around with it until you get something you like. This is why I like to dig it back as far as I can, because it gives me more space to work with. Now, if I do that, already the pupil is way too small. She looks a bit scared, so I'm not going to keep that there. I think I'm going to push this all back even further just because I know I'm going to need the extra space. Now usually this part of the eye, the center, is going to be sticking out more than the rest, but because we're doing this in Minecraft, we kind of have to make do with kind of the opposite of what real eyes do by building it inward instead of outward. Because we have so much layering to do with the blocks, we kind of have to do it this way. But I might try, let's try a couple of black dots in the middle. Her eyes might be a little bit big, but it's okay because I plan on putting some stuff around the edges. So really, I'm just layering stuff and experimenting with the eyes. I do want to get other greens though, because I don't want to have just this one green. You can really make the eyes pop if you find a good block to contrast it. I think the lime wool is a bit too bright, but I wanted to try melon. I wanted to try mixing in some melons in here. So if I just put a couple of melons, already her eyes look a little bit brighter from those. And I don't know if I should put one on that corner too. Maybe. I don't know. I'm just experimenting. That's a good trial. I don't know if I'm going to keep that or not. It's a good trial for the colored part of the eye, but I want to shape around the eye a bit better, and I'm going to need to use slabs and stairs for that. So let's do sandstone, slabs, and stairs. Oh, even better, we've got the smooth kind. That is one of the benefits of using sandstone for a skin tone, is you get the stairs and slabs to go with it. So I'm going to take these and just try to form more of an eye shape around the eye. Something else you can also do here is I could also get something like blackstone. Let me look for blackstone. Usually I just do an upper eyelash. I guess I could do along the bottom too, but just something simple like that already looks so much better. I'm gonna keep playing with it though. Faces never come the first time you do it. You just have to keep playing with it. This is where I start to get more detailed with my shaping, and I'm like start to see spots where I want to add stairs on the face. It's a good and a bad thing because sometimes I can't stop. I guess we could put a couple eyelashes along the bottom. I'm just not sure if I don't want to overdo it. It really depends on what kind of look we want for her. That's actually not too bad, but I think I'm not seeing enough white in her eyes, and that's something that I don't really like. We can use some quartz slabs if we wanted to mix some of those in for some more white. As long as it's not visible from the front, that's all I care about. Actually, I could go with that. I could say that that corner block is the highlight, and that wouldn't look too bad. I actually kind of like it. All I have to do now is take that one eye I have created and copy and flip it over. But before I do that, I need to add some kind of eyebrow. And I don't know, her hair is going to be kind of a whitish cream color, so I don't really know what color her eyebrows are going to be. I'm just going to use diorite for now because I don't know what else to use. And be careful of those little gaps. It looks like a dark spot in her face now. But I'm going to destroy that, reshape her face just so it fits the form of the eyebrow better. If I have to move this whole thing up, I will. Alright, now we're going to just copy it over, so I'm going to expand this selection back a little bit to make sure I'm selecting the entire eye. The nice thing about doing a symmetrical face is I can just copy, flip, and paste. And here's how she looks with both of her eyes. Oh, I actually kind of like those. Those are different. I've never done eyes quite like that before. They always end up looking a little different. Now that we've got the eyes in place, we need to focus on the nose and the mouth. And while I'm doing this, I'm also going to be throwing in a few textures and shadows and highlights, just because it's what I naturally do. But I'm going to start by taking these stairs and slabs, if I can even find that slab I was using before, and I'm going to start shaping the nose a little bit better. So here's where I can really go in and start adding lots of details. Yeah, this is the part that also takes me a while. I can never get it the first try because you can try all kinds of random stuff and it's just gonna look a little bit funny. So it does take patience and just trial and error until you get something you like. I'm not too pleased with this nose, but I'm just gonna continue and maybe I'll come back to it. I tried to make it smaller and then it looked too small, but when I go bigger, it looks too big, so I don't really know what to do with it. I'm going to fill in some slabs and stairs on the face just to refine these shapes a little more, and once you start adding them in some places like the nose, you're just going to have to add it everywhere at that point. I am putting a few darker blocks above the eye just so you can see that, yeah, it doesn't actually sink in, but putting the darker blocks there makes it look like it sinks in a little bit. I'm not sure how I feel about this face. There's some things about it I like, and then other things about it I don't like. One of the things I don't like about it is how flat it's looking from the side, but sometimes that's very hard to avoid with small faces like this. Okay, I'm going to focus on her mouth now, and I think, depending on what you want, I might just go with natural block colors for her mouth. I don't know if I'm going to give her any coloration in her lips, because you can do that. If I want to do that, I might use something like granite. But I think I'm just going to keep it a very neutral, natural color, and I'm not sure the best way to do this. I just kind of have to experiment with a bunch of stairs and slabs until I get something I want. So you can see all that shaping I did to the face before is making absolutely no difference right now because I am basically redoing it as I'm going. I'm just redoing stuff. Now she looks like she has a mustache. So faces are very hard. I'm not going to deny it. I don't really have an easy way of explaining all of this to you, but I hope maybe watching my thought process in some things is helping a little bit. Sometimes I do like this two-tone thing for the lips. I don't like how high her mouth is, though, and if I move it lower, it looks too low. Well, we'll keep trying stuff. I think this is the best I'm going to get the mouth for now. I settled with oak on the top, birch on the bottom, this birch underneath to add support for the textures. It is very hard to do this to where it doesn't look flat and boring, and also so that it kind of goes with the rest of the face. I don't like these little dark spots inside here, but I'm trying to think if there's a way around that, unless I carve that out, but I don't like that then. So I might play around with this face quite a bit more before I'm actually happy with it, but that gives you an idea of how to go about doing a mouth. Now if your mouth is open and expressive, that's a completely different story because then I usually like to build the inside of the mouth. But there is a very simple, closed looking mouth. And I'm going to examine this face and see if there's any other kind of shadows that I need to add anywhere else. I just colored those two back blocks as oak, and now I think I like it a little better. I'm probably going to change some things later, but there you go. You got a basic face on organic. And I said this before, but it is very important that it looks good from the side as well. And this does not look the best from the side. I don't like how the chin is poking out, and I don't like how the eyes are completely flat. If I were doing this properly, I would probably take these eyelashes, move them back a little bit so that we can see more of the eye from the side, like this. So you can see just a little bit more of it from the side. I'll probably go in here and adjust a lot of this stuff. But that's something else to consider, is how everything is going to look from the side. Can you see any parts of the eyes, or do you only see a straight line? I always like to make it so you can see part of the eye. I have continued to update the face some more, especially in the eyes. I did adjust the shape of those, and now I think they look a lot better from the front as well as the side. I'm sorry if my explanations aren't super clear, but it is very hard for me to come up with how to explain what I'm doing, and I try to show as much as I can, but it is kind of difficult to explain everything that goes through my mind. The best advice I can give is just to experiment with whatever blocks you're using. This is a good start for the face. I still might change it, like I keep saying, but let's go ahead and move on to texturing something else like the clothing. Just like I did before, I'm going to figure out some color palettes first for the clothing, and this is a little bit challenging just because of the colors that I really need for this organic we don't really have in Minecraft. Especially for the blue dress, I don't have the exact blues I need to match my drawing, so I have to compromise and just come up with the closest color combination I can get. Blue and purple are both really hard to find matches for. This is the closest I could do for the blue. And then I also have some greens and some browns for different parts of the dress. I did purposefully pick harder colors to use for this organic because I know it's just more challenging to come up with a good color palette that looks good. So I'm really challenging myself and challenging you if you are following along, trying to get this to actually look good. So now all I'm doing is just taking those colors and brushing on my own gradient onto the dress, and I'm just doing it one color at a time, starting from the darkest color and then trying to fade it into a brighter color. Or what you could also do, if you just wanted to do 2 colors at a time, either pick a shadow or a highlight. Depending on which one has the best contrast, you could lay down the shadow blocks or the highlight blocks, and then take the blend brush that I showed you earlier and blend them together, and it will automatically create a gradient for you if there is one to be found. I did try it on the dress, and it wasn't affecting it that much, which proves my point: we do not have enough blue blocks to make nice gradients. So I'm laying down the shadows. I'm also thinking about my shapes. On the dress, there really aren't that many wrinkles that I had previously modeled, but anytime I do see a section that does stick out a little more, I make sure to put some darker blocks next to that just to accentuate that this is a crease in the dress or there's something else going on here. Even if you have flat shapes on your organics, the texturing is where you can really bring out additional forms that might not exist from the shaping itself. You should have the modeling and shaping pretty accurate already, but we can use shadows and highlights to add much more depth that wasn't there before. So you really want to think about the forms as you're painting and make the shadows and highlights or anything that you're painting on your organic, make it follow any lines that you see in your model. That's exactly what I did for the cape to help emphasize the high points and low points. I painted the higher points with a lighter block, and then I used the blend ball brush here to blend it into the darker parts. The 2 biggest takeaways I can say for texturing large things like this is you're using the texture to follow your existing forms, but you're also thinking about the shapes that your textures themselves are making. So I am trying to make sure that my green highlights have very sharp and pointy edges just to help emphasize how these folds are happening on this cape. If you have a very loose fabric, you'll probably want to have a softer transition for the gradient, one that isn't as sharp. I hope this all makes sense. As you're texturing, don't ignore the model underneath and make sure that you're following those forms as well as creating your own new forms with your texture. And with all of this knowledge, we're just going to continue texturing our organic. It's kind of hard to explain beyond what I've already said because you're really just doing that same thought process and also just looking at your reference or picturing in your head what you want to look like and then going from there. So I'm working on the boots right now, and if I'm being very honest, I had no clue what I was doing with the laces on these things, so they probably don't even match. But aside from that, I was really just getting down the basic shadows first and then adding all the little details later. And something you'll notice is that within the little details of those shoelaces, I did go back and texture them again with different blocks. So I didn't use the same color block for those little details. I like to mix in some other colors too, just to add some variation and to keep it from looking too flat. I'm jumping around in the organic, just texturing whatever I see needs to be done. So next I'm going to be doing the hair because I know it's going to be pretty simple. Her hair is supposed to be a very, very bright blonde, almost white. So the blocks I ended up using were bone blocks, smooth quartz for a highlight, and white mushroom stem for a shadow. I think that is enough colors for this hair considering it is supposed to look very light anyway, so we don't really need as much contrast for something that's supposed to look this bright, but having a little bit there does help. Next I'm going to texture this little pouch that she has around her waist, and you can't see this really clearly in my original sketch, but I did do another little drawing of it just to give me an idea of what I was imagining it would look like. Now obviously it's going to be very hard to get that kind of gradient in Minecraft from the green to the brown, but I do the best I can with the space I have and just try to hint at some color and some designs. Next I'm texturing the staff, and I'm doing the same thing that my sketch shows where I wanted to mix in some greens into the wood. If only we had mossy wood, that would have been perfect for this, but we don't, so I just mix in regular green blocks into the wood. And from afar, it looks just as fine. I did have a very specific idea for the gemstone in the center of the staff. I wanted it to be surrounded by glass, and I wanted it to show a gradient underneath with clear highlights so that it looked shinier. And I kind of painted it in reverse, which I normally don't do. I did the glass first and then just painted through the glass using a larger sphere brush to reach. I wouldn't normally recommend doing that, but it did work in this case. And the final thing that I almost forgot was the little details that I had drawn on her dress. I needed to add those, and that was pretty simple. Make a random pattern with some blocks that look good. That's the summary of this entire video. And here is the organic, completely textured. If I'm being honest, it's not as good as I was hoping it would be, but there are a couple reasons for that. One of them is I don't think it looks exactly like my reference photo, and that's kind of why I don't like it as much. But also I feel like I have been rushing a little bit through this entire process just in order to get these videos out in a timely manner. If I were taking this build more seriously, I probably would spend a lot more time on it, but all things considered, I think it looks pretty good considering the time constraints and the very limited block palettes. Like I said before, the blue is very difficult to get a nice looking gradient with, and that was just the best I could manage with the blocks that we have. Overall, I think it looks pretty good. The face, there's still some things about the profile I'm not too pleased with, namely the chin. I might remove those blocks and remove that bump in the chin, but I do like how the eyes turned out. I think they look really nice from the side as well, so that was a huge improvement. And everything else is pretty straightforward, not much to comment on. But yeah, there is the organic, entirely textured. I hope you were able to learn something from this video. I know I kind of was all over the place, but I hope there was something in here that was helpful to you. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I do want to have one more video where we're going to add some environment to this organic. Yes, we do have the organic part complete, but it still feels like a very empty build, and that's what I'm going to talk about next time. We're going to add some environment and some interesting things to be surrounding her. So I will post a link to that video as soon as it is ready. I hope you have a great rest of your day or night, and I will see you then.